702. 702. Finance Feature.
10 minutes to 2 o'clock. This finance feature is brought to you by Stanlib Asset Management. Invest in more. And in our finance feature for today, we are talking about Q1 2026 debt index and why it is that high earners are drowning in debt, with executive head at DebtBusters, Benay Sager. Benay, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me on the show. I really enjoyed the previous conversation, by the way. I wish our topic was just as fun.
Well, do tell me, what is your favorite hidden gem?
I'm going to go with Paternoster on the west coast of the country.
Yes. Oh, my gosh. What a place, right? You feel like you're somewhere in like Europe vibes, but it's right here at home.
Absolutely. I think just the stillness and quietness, but we have so many beautiful places. It's unbelievable. So
is that possibly why we're in debt? Because we want to travel.
I wish I could say yes. I think our situation with our finances is a little bit more difficult. I think since 2021 we are in debt because I think we really need to be. Our income growth has not been great. It is better now than it was a few years ago, but as you know, since the pandemic, we haven't quite caught up with the income levels up until very recently. In fact, about a year ago, it took us about 5 years to get back to where we were. And I think that's why we've been having to borrow money to make ends meet.
And of course, with what's happening around the world, it's not making things easier with all of the basics going up.
Absolutely. And I think because this period that we're talking about, the data is up until the end of March, we hadn't even seen the impact of increases in petrol prices, diesel prices, electricity prices that normally started in the beginning of April. So I think when we talk about this report for Q2 2026 in 3 months' time, I fear we may be looking at a slightly more difficult picture than we are today.
Okay, so let's specifically speak about high earners. Who qualifies as a high earner according to this debt index?
Yeah, so we've been doing the debt index for a number of years, and this time we decided there's been a lot of talk about the high earners. So we basically wanted to look at specifically for those who are taking home 50,000 Rand or more, so really high earners. And, previously we had talked about those taking home more than 35,000 Rand. And I think we wanted to split these groups into two to see if there was any behavioral differences.
Yes.
So in this case, when we talk about the top earners, that's who we're talking about, those who take home more than 50,000 Rand.
Okay, so now when we say those who take home more than 50,000 Rand, I mean, there might be a perception from somebody listening who maybe is earning 15,000 Rand or 8,000 Rand and think to themselves, well, if I was earning 50,000 Rand, I definitely would not be in debt. Can you help us maybe understand from your experience and the information you have at hand what the trap is that happens when somebody goes from 15 to 50,000 Rand income?
Yeah, of course. And I think we should probably bring in the concept of age here. What we normally see is when we are all young, we're all young, but of course some of us are younger than others. At our younger days, in early 20s particularly, your starting salaries are going to be lower. It will be around 10 to 12 to 15,000 Rand. And as you get more experience and you change jobs and you build your career, as you get to your 40s and 50s, that's how you end up. So most of the group we're talking about are, older than 40 to 45. So we have to remember that in context. It's not so much that. So over time, what also happens that seems to coincide with not just your own professional growth, but also your personal growth. You tend to have families. We tend to want to become more independent. So we buy our car or we lease our car, whatever it might be. Then we buy a house or we buy a flat, whatever it might be. So generally, we build a bit of an asset base and we take on more debt as well as trying to, build a family. Now, all of these things are generally funded by higher incomes of higher salaries, and that's why we end up with, generally speaking, slightly higher age, slightly higher income, and slightly higher debt. These things kind of go together. So, I just want to make sure that particularly for our younger listeners to start thinking, well, gosh, I'm not earning 50,000. If I were, I wouldn't be in debt. So my point is generally we tend to match our lifestyle and our life stages to what we're earning. And I think that's why we end up with this. Now, specifically with the the group we're talking about, what seems to have happened in the last 5 years in particular is after the pandemic, and even going back before that, lending really shifted in South Africa. A lot of the lending activity started happening to higher income groups because these groups are deemed to be lower risk, or in other words, more likely to repay back the money that they borrow. And this was met by demand from this group who wanted to borrow. So the two, it was a match made in heaven. And I think it still continues. So generally, a lot of the lending activity right now is happening to higher income groups, and a lot of the borrowing activity is happening from higher income groups. And as a result, we ended up in the situation where we're talking about now, where those taking home 50,000 Rand or more have basically twice as much unsecured debt today than they did 5 years ago. In the process, they've also been supporting a broader range of family members, particularly post-pandemic. They're also supporting businesses. They're borrowing on behalf of their businesses, in some cases borrowing on behalf of their friends, and so on. So I think it's a complex set of drivers that ended up. It's easy, as you say, to sit on the outside and say, gosh, if I earned that much, I wouldn't be in this situation. But I think there's a little bit more detail to it.
And I'm glad you are explaining the nuances so that it's not just the perception that, well, people are drowning in debt because they didn't manage their finances properly, or they didn't, take financial advice, or they have low financial literacy. It is a number of contributing factors to some of the challenges being faced in that regard. Benay Sager, Executive Head at DebtBusters.